Hi, folks. Alix Mayer here from the Alix Mayer Show. My studio looks a little bit different today because I am actually going to be doing an episode by myself. I'm going to be presenting what I call the Measles Con. And I really want you to think about this. I'm going to be throwing out Easter eggs from the beginning. There's a big Easter egg in the beginning, then I'll be filling in the blanks and dropping more Easter eggs all the way through. And I want you to think about this. Does measles influence politics as they would have us believe? Or do politics influence measles? Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and please share with anybody you think would benefit from this information. The Alix Mayer Show is sponsored by MISH International, gold and silver specialists since 1963. When you need protection from monetary inflation and leveraged assets exposure, you contact the dedicated people at MISH International. MISH International, a family business, offers true expertise, integrity, reliability, and fair pricing of gold and silver. Visit their website at mishinternational.com. That's MISH international.com. So I'll be sharing my screen throughout most of this presentation. So I'll take it down if I'm going to be waxing long on any certain point. But as of now, I'll just be in the little corner and I'm going to be sharing my screen this whole time. So if you're not watching this presentation, you might not get as much out of it as people who can watch it. So I call this presentation the Measles Con. I've given it before, but today's version is a very updated version. So I run a group called Free Now Foundation. We are the only group trying to end the school vaccine mandates for children in California. And we use the courts to do that. That's the only way forward in the blue states. So that's what we do. You can see on screen, this is a screenshot of our homepage. We're one of the two groups organizing this protest at the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco when we were locked down in 2021 under all the vaccine mandates. It was a very successful protest, even though there was a lot of interference run by the SF Police Department. But, in the end of it all, the police who we were talking to in the beginning were really scared of us. And then in the end, they're like, wow, you guys are really cool. We would encourage you guys to protest more. So always a good idea to be friendly to people. So this is me. I just like to let you know that I love to talk about vaccines. I was vaccine disabled and brain damaged by vaccines in 1996 when I got 6 vaccines to go on a vacation. I just went to travel medicine at Palo Alto Medical Foundation. And, I didn't want any of those diseases that they said I could get in Southeast Asia. So I said, just give me everything you got. I don't want those diseases, which I called them back then. Now I would just call them infections, if that. I was brain damaged, disabled. I lost my career. My MBA became worthless and I had to step down from my position at Apple. And at the time I was running a worldwide group for Apple. It was a worldwide research group. So this is a cartoon by my friend, Dr. Shannon Kroner. And it says, my kidnappers are returning me after listening to me talk about vaccines for 5 hours. They'd probably actually throw me through the window after talking about vaccines for 1 hour if I were kidnapped, just to let you know who I am. Let's just kick off with the current headlines about measles. Here's an article in Children's Health Defense's publication called The Defender. This is from May 27th, so literally yesterday at the time I'm recording this episode. And the headline says, reckless. Virginia recommends the MMR vaccine for infants as young as 6 months. Really? 6 months old? And there was that whole study that was exposed by William Thompson, a top vaccine researcher at the CDC in 2015. And he confessed that giving the MMR vaccine, quote, on time, which was like ages 2 and 5, the 2 doses, led to 3 times as much autism, especially in African-American boys. And now Virginia is recommending the MMR vaccine for infants as young as 6 months old. All right, let's see what's going on here. So here's one of the Easter eggs. This is what the presentation is all about today. The presentation is about whether measles drives politics or if politics drives measles. So let me show you the 2 humps in measles cases. This is by rash onset date. This is directly from the CDC, and I pulled this data yesterday. This is January 2025 over here on the left, and you can see that the cases really start to ramp up in January 2025. And then suddenly, around April 6th or 7th, and I'll show you what happened then, the cases really start to go down and the trend line just goes down and almost out. And nothing really happens the rest of the year in 2025. But then look at over here on the far right, you can see January 2026. and the measles cases just shoot up again. So what's that all about? Something happened in January 2026 to the vaccine schedule. Oh, yeah. The CDC and the ACIP reduced the vaccine schedule from 17 vaccines to 11. And that was not a very popular thing. So let me show you exactly what happened with these two humps. This is one of your Easter eggs. I'm really psyched about this new slide here. So here's what happened with the first measles case hump, I'm going to call it, in January 2025, the 29th and 30th of January to be specific. RFK Jr. was going through Senate hearings for him to be confirmed as Secretary of HHS. So, that's not a very popular thing. And the measles just happens to start going up. Measles cases just happen to start going up. He's confirmed on February 13th. And then there's this like little trend line that keeps going up and up and up and up. And then finally they start coming down. There's a couple girls in Texas, West Texas, who the media says died from measles. Their parents insist that they did not. I'm going to go into detail on that in this presentation. And then after the second measles death in one of those girls in Texas, and again, I say measles death, but it's not actually measles death, RFK Jr. finally, I believe, catches on to what's going on. And he holds a press conference April 6th, 2025. And then that measles hump, that cluster of measles cases just peters out. That trend line goes down, 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 down. Okay, so really nothing happening for the rest of the year with measles, maybe trending up a little bit November, December, but boom, what happens in January? The CDC, as I said, reduces the vaccine schedule from 17 vaccines to 11. And that happened, I think, on January 7th. Sorry, the number's missing right there. But then you see that this hump also has an ending point, just like that first hump did in 2025. The ending point, guess what? It's when Judge Murphy stayed the ACIP meeting. That's the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. He called off the ACIP meeting March 17th, and it didn't happen. And they were so scared of that meeting because that's where a lot of the COVID shot harms are going to be exposed publicly and be on the public record. And so once Judge Murphy made his ruling and ACIP was not allowed to meet, then the measles cases suddenly go away in 2026. Not go away. I mean, they're back down to these levels. And I'm going to talk to you about what this means. What does it mean that there are all these little bars here of measles cases? We're going to talk about the difference between elimination and eradication and what's actually normal and how well the United States is doing. You're going to be surprised how well we're doing with measles, despite these two humps. So, okay, I think you get it. Look at this. Is measles driving politics, or does politics drive measles? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I want to say a thank you to all the people who've done a lot of work on this issue. Dr. James Lyons-Weiler did a lot of work on the genetics of the measles that were in West Texas in 2024. We've been unable to get the strains from 2025, which is odd, but I'll go into that more later. Polly Tommy and Dr. Brian Hooker, Mickey Willis, they've all gone down to West Texas to interview the families of the girls who supposedly died of measles. Levi Quackenboss did a great article for us at Free Now Foundation about this measles in West Texas. Dr. Pierre Corey, Dr. Robert Malone have medical analyses that I relied on for this presentation. And I think anybody else who's investigated the, quote, measles deaths, unquote, in West Texas. So let's take a step back in history for a little bit when measles wasn't a big deal at all. And I'm going to show what happened after measles wasn't a big deal. So this is Mary Bell. She's a little scary. She's very old. She's from the 1950s. I put her glasses back on because I think that's kind of scary. There. Okay, this is Mary Bell. And she's the doll who gets well. And she comes with all these props. She gets she breaks her leg and she's on crutches. She comes with a cast and a crutch and she gets better. She can get a cut and she has bandages. She gets better. And she has measles spots. And so little girls would put measles spots on Mary Bell in the 1950s and take them off because she was the doll who got well. She just gets better from everything, including measles. Measles was not a big deal in the 1950s. It was a rite of passage. So there's a little rhyme that comes in the box. I have measles and my spots are red, but I'll be well soon if I stay in bed. So that's Mary Bell. So let's fast forward to 1969. Most of us remember this Brady Bunch episode where, again, measles was not a big deal. And you've got all the kids playing Monopoly in their room and everybody's laughing and joking around and saying how great it is they don't have to go to school that day. And so all 6 kids are home and they're just saying, hey, if you have to get sick, you sure can't beat the measles. Mild. It's mild. So let's look. Oh, this is so weird. My slide is not showing up. This is the second time this has happened. But anyway, this is a slide that shows the measles death rate from the early 1900s through modern times. And right before the measles vaccine was introduced, it's very clear from our Bureau of Vital Statistics that only 1 in 400,000 people who got measles actually died. 1 in 400,000. So that's why it wasn't a big deal. And these were probably children who were poor, malnourished, probably didn't have a lot of vitamin A. And that's probably what made them susceptible. Now, let's see what happens after this. So now, of all odd things, there's this guy named Alexander Langmuir, and he's the chief epidemiologist at CDC in the 1960s. He's actually the founder of CDC's Epidemic Intelligence Services, otherwise known as EIS. And you can think of this as the CIA of the CDC. So, that makes my dander go up right there. But in the 1960s, he was the chief promoter of the measles vaccine. Now, what did he say about wanting to develop the measles vaccine? This is what he said. I found the actual published study that quotes him, and this is here, Alexander Langmuir, and this is his writing, his paper, and it says the importance of measles as a health problem. And so he says to those who ask me, why do you wish to eradicate measles? Why were people asking that anyway? Because it's mild. That's why they were asking. Why do you want to eradicate something that's so mild? He replies with the same answer that Hillary used when asked why he wished to climb Mount Everest. He said, because it is there. And to this may be added, and it can be done. It was mild. Otherwise, people wouldn't ask him why he wanted to eradicate measles. So this reporter on PBS asks this guy, David Edmondson, whose blood was used to develop the measles vaccine, how did it feel to know that your blood was used by Enders, the developer of the vaccine, to develop the measles vaccine that saved millions of lives? What a leading question. Did it really save millions of lives? How could it have saved millions of lives when the death rate was only 1 in 400,000 in the United States right before the measles vaccine was introduced? Those numbers don't even make sense. You can't reconcile those numbers at all. So very leading question. And his answer is also really weird. It's like Langmuir. He's like, I'm very happy to know that. And that it saved millions of lives. Like he knows that from the reporter. And then he says he feels very warm towards society. This guy wasn't saying that his dorm mates at his prep school, by the way, he's a prep school kid, were dying of measles and he was really happy that that wouldn't happen anymore. He wasn't saying anybody was suffering. He just said he was very happy to know that the vaccine had saved millions of lives and he feels warm towards society. Just doesn't add up. Measles was not dangerous. So now here comes the measles vaccine, and there are tons of safety issues with the original vaccine. And also there are tons of safety issues with today's vaccine. I already told you about the confession of William Thompson from the CDC that the measles vaccine given quote unquote on time has at least a 3 times risk of causing autism in children, especially African-American boys. But let's see about this original measles vaccine, which had aluminum in it. It doesn't anymore, but what happened when they introduced the original measles vaccine, it was causing pneumonia and encephalopathy. That's brain damage. That's a word for brain damage. That's what I had when I got vaccine injured. I had encephalitis and encephalopathy, and that was the brain damage I had and substantially recovered from. There's actually a 4 times risk of encephalopathy among British children in a 1970s case control study. It was also causing atypical measles after a vaccinated person got measles. And atypical measles was a more serious disease with a higher and more prolonged fever with unusual skin lesions and severe pneumonia. So that's what the vaccine did to a very mild illness. Today's vaccine doesn't have aluminum. It's a highly attenuated MMR. And there's a risk of aseptic meningitis. That means it's not caused by a virus or a bacteria that can be determined. They're saying we don't know what causes the meningitis, aseptic. It's really a vaccine-induced meningitis. And I wonder if the reason we need a meningitis vaccine is because vaccines cause the meningitis. Think about that. Some people agree with me on that one. I haven't done all my research on that yet, so just wondering. And also what's been found in a couple different researchers is the incomplete clearance of measles from the body after getting today's measles MMR vaccine. And measles was combined with mumps and rubella into the MMR, in case you don't know. I'm sure most of my listeners know that. It caused this very specific condition called ileocolitis, a very specific part of the colon that was inflamed. And the measles strain from the vaccine was recovered from that area in this very small study by Andrew Wakefield that was published in The Lancet in the 1990s. And that was only a case series, I think, of about 12 children. And that's why he lost his license for publishing a case series where he never said that vaccines cause autism. You can go find it. It's still available. It's been retracted, but it does not say that vaccines cause autism. But that's why he lost his medical license. Also, there's another guy named Kawashima who found that measles virus was in mononuclear cells. Mono, and in autoimmune hepatitis. So it's causing inflammation of the liver also. And those were studies he did in the year 1996 and 2000. So the vaccine, it didn't come without problems. So we're trying to, quote, eradicate an illness, quote unquote, because it's there, but you're creating all these more serious issues. So at some point, the cost benefit needs to be weighed, and it's actually never been done until recently. I'm going to go into that in a sec. So here's another problem with the vaccine. There's an issue called waning immunity. It's also called secondary vaccine failure. Primary vaccine failure is when somebody doesn't mount the proper level of antibodies, and so they're considered to not be immune from the vaccine. And that happens in about 5, maybe 10% of people who get the measles or MMR vaccine. So that's primary vaccine failure. Secondary vaccine failure is when this theoretically protective level of antibodies wears off, and that's called waning immunity. So let's just look at the huge problem with waning immunity and the measles vaccine. In 1984, there's a study that said the measles can occur within a school population with a documented immunization level of 100%. 100%. That's due to waning immunity. Also, another study in 1989 and 1991, among some cases during those couple of years, 20 to 40% of those cases were among those with 1 to 2 doses of the measles vaccine. See, waning immunity, if the vaccine even works. I think it does. It seems to prevent the rash. In 2005 to 2011, there were a bunch of cases. 19% of those were among those with 1 to 2 doses of measles vaccine. And I've got all the sources down here if you're interested. So let's look at this guy, Dr. Gregory Poland. He is an emeritus vaccinologist from the Mayo Clinic. He got really obsessed with the measles vaccine and with the concept of waning immunity because it's such a big problem that he ended up focusing his entire career on that. So let's see what he has done. I'm just going to pull up one of his studies. He's done a ton of studies on waning immunity, but let's just look at this next one. And I'm going to explain one thing before we get to that study. I'm going to talk about antibodies. Antibodies are a component of your immune system made by your B cells in the presence of an antigen. An antigen generates antibodies. Antigen is a protein. It could be like an allergen. It could be a vaccine, a protein in a vaccine that's part of what we think is infectious material. And then your body develops antibodies to that. That is conflated or equated, depending on who you talk to, with immunity, okay? It happens naturally when people get an illness, they make antibodies, and those can be measured afterward. And it also happens after somebody gets a vaccine. You can also make antibodies when you become allergic to something or asthmatic to something. So anyway, there's 2 different ways to interpret those antibodies. There's something called seroprotective antibodies, and that's a protective level of antibodies. And it's basically an antibody level sufficient to confer immunity. And so in a vaccine study, this is what they look at. They look at antibody levels, and they want to see a 4-fold increase in antibodies before and after the vaccination in their study subjects. And that has to happen in 70% of people to determine if that vaccine is effective. That's the effectiveness standard normally. And it's only based on these IgG antibodies. Now, a much lower level than that is if you're going out and measuring people's blood, they might not have a high level of antibodies. So they might not have a seroprotective level, but you can see that they've been exposed to measles or the measles vaccine in the past because they have an antibody level that shows seroprevalence, which is basically any detectable level of antibodies, whether they're considered protective or not. So let's go look at Dr. Poland's study where he actually only looks at seroprevalence, lower standard than seroprotection. So here's his study. It was published in the journal called Vaccines in 2022. It's called Seroprevalence of Measles Antibodies in a highly MMR vaccinated population. And I'm just going to read you the key part here. It says antibodies specific to measles in a cohort of 1,393 adults aged 20 to 44, so pretty young, resulted in a non-trivial proportion of almost 38% of study subjects being negative for measles. They're negative for measles, and this is just seroprevalence. So almost 40% of people in the study aged 20 to 44 years old who had been previously vaccinated with multiple doses of the measles vaccine do not show ever having been exposed to measles or the measles vaccine. That is really bad news for the vaccine makers. And so this is why Dr. Gregory Poland got obsessed with this idea of waning immunity in the measles vaccine. So, and again, this is not seroprotection. If he actually reported on the level of antibodies and whether or not they were seroprotective, that proportion that were supposedly seroprotective for measles would go way, way down. That would go to about, I would guess, like 50%, maybe even lower. So I want you to keep this in mind. This is a really important point because when people point fingers at the unvaccinated for causing measles outbreaks, why aren't we looking also at the waning immunity in the vaccinated population? And if the vaccinated people are so mad at the unvaccinated for measles, then why aren't those vaccinated people who are so pro-vaccine going out and getting multiple doses of measles vaccine to make sure that they don't have this problem with waning immunity? Because otherwise they don't know if they're the problem or not. Okay. And then the CDC, this is a very recent chart from the CDC. I just want to show you how many cases there were in 2025 over here in the right-hand column and 2026 over here in the left-hand column. 2025, there were about 2,300 measles cases during the year. In 2026, we have almost 2,000 to date. But here's what I want to show you down here. If somebody can't prove they were vaccinated, then they get lumped into a category of vaccine status that's unvaccinated or unknown. So they're saying that 92% and 93% of people were unvaccinated or unknown, and that gets conflated to just be the talking point that this is the percentage of unvaccinated people who got the measles, which isn't true because a lot of people were unknown. And we know from those former studies with, for example, 19% of people who were fully vaccinated for measles got measles. That's probably more accurate. And I want to show you that there are cyclical cases of measles every single year. This is what elimination of measles means. It doesn't mean it's gone. Eradication would mean that we probably would only see a handful of cases every few years or every decade, but elimination of measles is the status of measles. We've never labeled it as eradicated, and it doesn't have to do with the anti-vaxxers, and I'll prove that in a second. So this is elimination of measles. You're going to get cases every year. They're going to cycle, and it looks like basically every 5 or 6 years, there's kind of a big cycling of measles cases. But I also want to note, and the presentation is going to go into this, there were political plays happening in 2014 and 2015, in 2019, and also in 2025 and 2026. So this is where you'd really start to question if politics drives measles or if measles drives politics. So anyway, this is elimination of measles. Now, I want you to know that even though these bars get kind of big in some years, like 2014, 2019, 2025, and 2026, it's not that big of a deal. Let's look at the annual non-US measles cases versus US measles cases from the year 2000 to 2025. And the red bars are all the measles cases worldwide, and the blue bars that you can't even see are the measles cases that have been in the United States as a comparator to the worldwide measles cases. So it's looking like the United States is not the problem here, right? Because it's all over the world. And this top line is a million cases worldwide. So you see in 2019, you get up toward 800,000 cases, and back in the year 2000, again, around 800,000 cases. But you can see it's not eliminated. It's not eradicated. It's always going around the world. Let's just look at how well the US is doing with measles. Here, I calculated the US share of measles cases from 2000 to 2025 using the same data you saw on the slide before. And so just to put all this in perspective, the United States as a percent of the world population has 4.2% of the world population. Now, if we have an average vaccination rate for measles, then we would carry an average measles burden in the United States. So we would probably carry 4.2% of the measles cases around the world. And I'm actually going to show you that the United States is not the most vaccinated country. I know what you're thinking. We're not the most vaccinated country. So it turns out the US average share of measles cases since 2000 is 0.06%, 0.06%. So do you know how well we're doing with measles compared to the rest of the world? Incredibly well. We're doing 71 times better than expected with the measles, even with thousands of cases last year and thousands of cases this year. So let me just show you the measles vaccination rates around the world. Thank you, Grok, for putting this together for me. This still needs verification, but I think it's generally probably close to the correct answer. I looked at all the countries around the world and I asked Grok to tell me what the average measles vaccination coverage was. And so the US is about 92% across the country, but the average around the world is 84%. So we're higher than average, but look at all these countries, like 100 countries that have even much higher vaccination rates than the United States, like almost 100% vaccination rates. Algeria, Bhutan, Fiji, Kazakhstan, Maldives, Qatar, where are some bigger countries. China has a higher vaccination rate than the United States by far. Iraq does, Saudi Arabia does. I mean, look at all these places, Jordan, Georgia, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Sweden, they all have higher vaccination rates for measles than the United States. So United States is a little higher than average, but is not the most vaccinated country. And we are doing really well with measles. In fact, 71 times better than expected with measles. Now, I want to show you something that I did. I first did this in spring of 2025, and now there's a study from Nicholas Hulsher and Peter McCullough actually validating my finding here. I mean, it's not like, not that somebody else couldn't do this, but I was the first one to put it out in a chart as far as I know. So here are the deaths reported after measles vaccines from VAERS. So the critics are going to say, well, these are unverified reports. But, on the other hand, it's not like VAERS is advertised and it is a bear to enter a VAERS report. It takes a long time, probably an hour on average for somebody to do it. And doctors don't get paid for their time to enter a VAERS report. And also, if a doctor gives somebody a vaccine and they get injured, doctors have a blind spot. They never want to admit iatrogenesis. That means that what they did to a patient caused an illness. So it's a big cognitive dissonance hump from them to get over to even realize that a vaccine they gave a patient would have caused a severe reaction enough for them to report it to VAERS. Now, doctors aren't the only ones who can report. Families can report, patients can report, but it's a very difficult process to get through. So these are all the deaths reported after the measles vaccine in VAERS, and you can see like only one in 82 and 88. Now, 82, that was even before the VAERS database was established. The law went into place in 1986, so it was really not functioning until 1989, but people reported some past deaths, obviously. So you can see that the deaths, these are raw numbers, so 11 deaths here in 1995 and 9 deaths in 2009. But anyway, all those deaths through 2024, I don't have the recent 2025 numbers, add up to about 302 deaths reported to VAERS. The underreporting rate for deaths to VAERS, according to the Lazarus study from 2010, is probably 7.7. So you could multiply this by 7.7 or let's say 8. And so you would get thousands of deaths after the measles vaccines if you did that. Steve Kirsch found an underreporting rate of about 40. So that takes us even higher in the number of deaths that probably happened in the real world. So this is just a Sentinel database that tracks the ones that are recorded, but it doesn't record all deaths after measles vaccines. So let's see what happens when I overlay the deaths that have been reported actually after measles infection. So those are in red. So I added those here, just the raw numbers. So there were 123 deaths between 1989 and 1991. There's 1 death in 2015, and they're claiming 3 deaths in 2025. Now, I already told you that 2 of those deaths, according to the parents, were not from measles. And we're going to get into that in this presentation. But look at the difference here. There have been 127 deaths recorded after measles infection in the same time period as there were 302 deaths recorded after measles vaccine. I mentioned McCullough and Hulsher, who did the study of this actual comparison, and they found that you are 2,700 times more likely to die after the measles vaccine than after getting measles. Crazy. We know so many of our listeners understand the relationship between health freedom and our personal and economic freedoms. It's the same principle. If you're one of our audience who's concerned about inflation, paper asset crises, and ongoing monetary crises, you may have already started accumulating gold and silver or are considering doing so. There's no gold dealer we know who's better positioned to serve the freedom community than Mish International in Menlo Park, California. I'm one of the many happy customers who's purchased gold or silver in their showroom, or I've had it delivered through their secure courier service. They are true veterans who are honest, fair, and reliable, and so knowledgeable regarding all the choices of gold and silver bars and coins to help you choose the products that fit your goals and your worldview. The principal, Robert Mish, is world-renowned for his expertise in rare coins as well. Write down this number, 650-324-9110. That's 650-324-9110. And visit mishinternational.com. That's MISH international.com to learn more about this notable company. Do you ever wonder what my foundation, Free Now Foundation, really does? It turns out that after all the articles and videos that I do, that a lot of people still wonder what we really do. We're California's leading medical freedom nonprofit, but did you know we're the only group in California trying to end the medical mandates so children can go to school safely in California? And what does that mean? People don't get this, but it means there's no need for an exemption if there's no mandate. We won't need a religious exemption. We won't need a medical exemption. We won't need any type of exemptions anymore because parents will just be able to say no. No is a complete sentence. And Free Now Foundation is going to stay in the courts and do this legal strategy, pursue it as long as it takes until parents call the shots again in California and beyond, and parents can just say a simple no. So if you share this vision of a world where we don't have medical mandates, where children do not need an exemption of any sort to go to school, and this work calls to you, please consider supporting us at Free Now Foundation, freenowfoundation.org. That's spelled FREENOW foundation.org, and make a donation today. Okay, now I'm going to get into the political part of this, and I call this the Measles Con. So here we go. First, I also had AI make this chart because I started to get so suspicious. Every time there was a big measles outbreak and it hit the media, there was a bill introduced in the California legislature and also in other states, which I show here. And these bills go at lightning speed through the legislatures, especially in California. In fact, I calculated that vaccine bills to take away parental rights around vaccines move at a pace twice as fast as any other bill that goes through the legislature in California. Twice as fast. It's really crazy. So we're going to get into this in this presentation. California 2015, there's a bill called SB 277. This is what demolished the personal belief exemption, which only 2.5% of families were using at the time. And that also included the religious exemption. So that went away after these measles cases that were reported at Disneyland. That was a really big deal. And it didn't take very long for that to be signed into law by Governor Brown. And then we lost the ability to opt out of vaccines except for medical reasons in California. Washington State, 2019, there was a measles outbreak there. And oh my gosh, stay tuned for the whistleblower on this one. You're not going to believe it. A bill was introduced. It sails through really fast, gets signed into law. It makes MMR vaccination mandatory in Washington State for school attendance. New York had cases in 2019. Again, lightning speed bill gets signed into law, removes parental rights around vaccination. Connecticut, they didn't have an outbreak, but they referenced the West Coast outbreaks and said, well, they need to pass a law too. So they did. Connecticut is another state that is very, very strict on vaccination status for schools. And then California came back and did it again. We actually predicted this at Free Now Foundation in early 2026. We saw an article that was published in a publication called EdSource. EdSource is a school data site that also publishes articles. And one of the big funders is the Bill Gates Foundation. And in that article, it said that we had to look at different schools and see which schools in California were falling below the herd immunity thresholds. And so you can actually go to an interactive map and see which schools fall below the standard. And then sure enough, we predicted there'd be a bill. And it was only 2 weeks later after that article, and 8 days after the cases, that they introduced a bill. And guess what? It's a bill in our legislature. It's called AB 2651. It's still being deliberated right now in our legislature. And it is a bill that would report to the schools would report to parents if any of the vaccination rates fall below a herd immunity threshold for the 10 vaccines that are required for children to go to school in California. So exactly what the EdSource article was hinting at. We predicted it, it happened, and luckily that bill has not been signed into law, but we're very nervous about it, of course, because of this history. All right, let's take a deeper look at the Disneyland cases. This is going to get very interesting very fast. So December 4, 2014, there's these cases of measles in Disneyland, supposedly, and here's the Wikipedia page. And I checked this again to see if this was still current a few weeks ago when I gave this presentation to Mickey Willis, and it is. I didn't check yesterday, but guarantee this is the Wikipedia page for the Disneyland measles outbreak. And we're just going to focus here on the young boy with measles from the Disneyland measles outbreak. It's labeled young boy with measles in Disneyland from that 2014 outbreak. But let's look a little closer at that picture. Hold on, what's that? There's something weird going on his arm. It turns out that is a smallpox vaccination reaction. And the caption on this picture, not kidding you, says this 1968 image depicted the face and back of a young child after receiving a smallpox vaccination. This brings up a couple questions. Number one, why didn't they have a picture of anybody with measles from the Disneyland cases in 2014? If those cases were recorded officially, then these people were presenting themselves in the medical system. So where's the photo? Why do they have to use a picture of somebody from 1968? Also, this is a smallpox vaccine reaction. And when Mickey and I were talking about this, I said, doesn't it look like you could get measles or what looks like a measles rash as a reaction to a vaccine? And he said, yeah. So maybe measles is a detox reaction from other vaccines. We don't know right now. It's a question, needs to be studied. What is measles? Okay, here we go. So February 2015, California introduces SB 277 to remove the religious and personal belief exemption to vaccination. Becomes law awfully quickly. As we just talked about, Oregon and Washington cases, 2019. Let's go look at this one more closely. Washington, here's a headline. Washington is under a state of emergency as measles cases rise. This is in CNN. This is January 29th, 2019, one of those peak measles cases years, right? So let's see what happens there. Washington state passes a bill removing exemption for measles vaccine, April 18th, 2019. Wow. Wow. Huh. So is measles driving politics? Maybe not. Maybe politics is driving measles. Here's my friend JB Hanley. He has a blog on Substack. It's really good. And he heard from a whistleblower. Now, this has not been adjudicated in court, but here's the title of his blog post. And unfortunately, this is behind a paywall now, but I do have this screenshot. Whistleblower, measles outbreak faked by Pacific Northwest health officials in 2019. And here's the guy who wrote him. It says, I was a fiscal analyst for the immunization programs division of the Oregon Health Authority working on floor 4 of the Portland State Office building. So here's what he tells JB. The 2019 measles outbreak in Vancouver/Portland was fake. They made it up in order to change Washington's law. I know because when I was writing queries on the Sentinel database, he tried testing it against that database and nothing came up. Nothing matched. Nothing matched the sequence that they said was circulating. It wasn't in the database. So he asked his boss why that was, and he froze. That's not a good sign. And this guy who wrote JB Hanley found memos that they were contracting with a PR firm to promote the fake outbreak in order to pass the bill. How about that? My dander just goes up a lot here. And these are not the only examples. California with the weird Wikipedia page and this whistleblower in Washington. We're going to get into more of this, especially modern times with RFK Jr. in just a minute here. So here we are. Let's see how the measles was used to manipulate RFK Jr. In fact, specifically, it manipulated a phrase out of his mouth. So this is the RFK Jr. narrative from 2023 to present time, which is right now, spring, summer of 2026. So, okay, let's get into this timeline. It's so crazy. Okay, so April 19th, 2023, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announces he's running for president. He had told me about his presidential run a couple months beforehand. I had been on his board at Children's Health Defense for about 4 years. And when he told me that he was going to run for president, he put me on his finance committee to help him raise money for the campaign, which I did. And it was my honor and pleasure to do that. But he announces he's running in April of 2023. So fast forward a little bit, and a new character, let's say, reappears. Deborah Birx, Scarf Lady, the one who wears her Hermes scarf tied like a Boy Scout handkerchief. She wrote a book called Silent Invasion: The Untold Story of the Trump Administration, COVID-19, and Preventing the Next Pandemic before it's too late. Now, she, as you probably remember, was the White House coronavirus response coordinator from 2020 to 2021. She was famously doing all those press conferences. So what happens with Deborah Birx a few months after Bobby announces his candidacy for pregnancy? I'm just going to call this circumstantial evidence, and here's the definition of it. But I'm going to tell you that the people in Texas, West Texas, where the outbreaks of measles occurred, have the same thinking that I do here. Here we go. Deborah Birx, former COVID-19 White House advisor, to join Texas Tech's Health Center in Lubbock County, September 13th, 2023, just a few months after Bobby Kennedy announces he's running for president. Isn't that weird? Wouldn't this be a demotion for somebody who likes to wear Hermes scarves? You're not going to find an Hermes store in Lubbock County. It's strip malls. It doesn't make any sense. It seems like a demotion, but apparently it's not. Here's what the article says. Her expertise will greatly contribute to efforts in yielding science in service to people as we work with community partners to identify and address health challenges specifically in rural areas of West Texas. Health challenges in rural areas of West Texas, and she's the vaccine spokesperson from the COVID era. What's going on here? Because the rural areas of West Texas is where this presentation is going to focus now, because that's where supposedly the 2 deaths from measles were. So I am not familiar with this area, so I asked AI, is Texas Tech associated with Texas University Medical Center in Lubbock? And I asked that because Texas University Medical Center is where the 2 girls supposedly died of measles. And the answer is yes. Deborah Birx is at Texas Tech, and the 2 measles deaths were at Texas Tech University Medical Center, and they're pretty much one and the same. Very interesting. Hospital protocols. Okay. The first cases in the Mennonite community were here in Seminole, Texas. The closest hospital to that community was up here, an hour-and-a-half drive at Texas Tech. I just wanted to show you it on the map. And I want to point out also that if these people were targeted, which they think they were, especially with the arrival of Deborah Birx in 2023, they think they were targeted. What an interesting group to target. Mennonites, who a lot of people say are backward in their health practices, and they don't get vaccines and they don't use pharmaceuticals. But you know what? I'm a Maha person, and these people are more Maha than any of us Maha people. I'd like to be more Mennonite. It just preys on these biases and stereotypes where, these outbreaks happen. Like if you think back to COVID and Wuhan, and they were saying it came from bat soup, all the Americans were like, ew, we don't eat bats. That's so gross. No wonder, there's a COVID outbreak there. It's just, it plays on the stereotypes, and that always happens. Like there's never a really scary virus that emerges from St. Louis, right? Okay, you get my point. So all I'm saying here is if there's smoke, there's fire. So thank you, AI. I just had a little illustration. Good time here illustrating Texas with an Hermes scarf on it. So, and let's back up a tiny bit. The actual first cases were January 23rd, 2025. That's an interesting date. That's a very interesting date. These cases were not in Lubbock County. They were in Harris County, but let's see what happens after January 23rd, 2025. Do you remember? I'm going to go there in a second, but I just wanted to point out, this is weekly measles cases by rash onset date. And here we are, 2025. Here's February 2025. And here's the beginning of the hump that we talked about at the very beginning of the presentation, right here. So let's see what happens. Oh, wow. 7 days later, RFK Jr.'s Senate committee hearings. Look at that. There's Dr. Elizabeth Warren having her meltdown as she's questioning Kennedy about being, quote unquote, anti-vaccine. And then a couple weeks later, he's sworn in. There's Judge Gorsuch, who was handpicked by Kennedy to swear him in. February 13th, 2025. Watch these dates. Keep track of these dates. This is mid-February right now. So, 2 weeks later, February 26th, headline, Reuters, Texas child is the first reported U.S. measles death in a decade as outbreak hits more than 130 people. Very interesting timing. Do measles drive politics, or does politics drive measles? Can't say that enough here. Wow. So I go to Google Trends and see how much people are searching for the term measles. And wow, February 27th, that's That is a big headline right there. A lot of people, a lot of activity about measles right then. And I'm going to come back to this chart and explain the peaks, okay? So Kennedy hems and haws about this. He really doesn't want to endorse the measles vaccine because the people who voted for him to get him in office are people like me who've been harmed by vaccines, and we think people should have a choice. But I'm anti-vax for myself, but I think everybody else should have a choice. He thinks people should have a choice. He thinks people should have a choice. So he says measles outbreak is a call to action for all of us. Now, this whole article is so interesting because it wasn't written in his hand. It wasn't his voice. And so I actually ran it through AI and I said, compare this to his past writings and what percent of it sounds like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And it said maybe 20% of it sounded like RFK Jr. based on his past writings. So this was definitely written for him, but he made sure he did not endorse the measles vaccine in this first piece. Now, the media tells him what they want him to say. And I'm going to show you that once he finally says this sentence or something close to this sentence, that this measles outbreak goes away. So here's the subhead that they can't attribute to him because he didn't say it. But the media wants him to say that MMR vaccine is crucial to avoiding potentially deadly disease. Kennedy didn't say it here. He didn't want to say that. So let's go to West Texas and look at what's happening there. This is Dr. Edwards, who is the treating physician for a lot of these families, and I think met the two girls who supposedly died of measles. And he's saying in this interview with Mickey Willis, this measles is not acting like the measles in the books. So this is not the nothing burger measles of yesteryear, like we saw in the Brady Bunch or that Mary Bell, the doll, had. But he is saying there's a hopeful message. It's dangerous, but it's treatable. Now, he was saying that these kids looked like they were on their deathbeds, but they were revived very quickly the next day with budesonide to open up the lungs and cod liver oil for the vitamin A. So I got suspicious at this point. This measles is not acting like the measles of yesteryear. That's really weird. Could this be a gain of function type of measles, or maybe it's a contact toxin and we're talking about gain of fiction? I like to always speak to the people who believe in viruses and also the people who are skeptical or don't believe in viruses. So what is going on with this genetic sequence that they're finding in West Texas? By the way, I've done a lot of research into strains. I was researching the strains of Lyme disease back in like 2010, 2011, 2012, and I got really deep into that research, and there's a lot of irregularities with that. And then, of course, like if you sequence SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus said to cause the symptoms called COVID, there's irregularities there too, which led people to believe that it was a gain of function sequence. So when I hear that the measles is not like the measles of yesteryear and it's more dangerous, I thought, wow, I wonder if that's gain of function. So I start doing some research, and sure enough, here's what I find. I go to the CDC website and World Health Organization. I'm going to quote the World Health Organization here. The measles in West Texas is strain D8. Now, think about that. The vaccine was developed around strain A, right? We're alphabetical. So this is strain D8. So this is like pretty far away from the strain that was used to develop the vaccine. And from my other research, I found that the measles vaccine supposedly is broadly protective, regardless of what strain you have. But D8 is obviously not acting like those other strains. So here's what the WHO says about it. They reported genotype D8 sequences from the affected states with single nucleotide substitutions. Ding, 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 ding. What? Nucleotide substitutions? Who's substituting? Who's doing the substitutions? So that's what I called my friend at IPAC EDU, Dr. James Lyons-Weiler, because his professor was the guy who developed the BLAST system where you can look at the different strain sequences. And so he's an expert in using that system and understands the genetics really, really well. So there we are at the Maha Ball in January 2025. It was a really incredible event in DC. I hope you got there too. It was incredible. But here's what he found. These are slides from him. And so he is looking at cyclical mutation patterns in the measles from 2005 through 2024. This is the beginning of 2025, and the data stops there. We don't have 2025. because the CDC refused to give him the strain sequences from 2025 from Texas. And they still refuse to do that. We've had Bobby Kennedy pushing to get the sequences. I got Senator Ron Johnson interested in trying to get the sequences out of the CDC, and they will not give them to this day. And again, this is spring/summer of 2026. We still don't have those sequences from 2025 from West Texas. We don't have them. Why is that? But here he's showing that there's an increasing amount of mutations, which is very different from recent history. So here's what he says. I'm not going to read this whole slide to you. I know there's a lot of words on it, but I'm going to summarize it for you. This is what Dr. James Lyons Weiler wrote up about early measles strain results. He said that the measles sequence is starting to change in important areas. The mutations are appearing in a regular pattern, not an irregular pattern. He said there's evidence of vaccine escape, which is what I alluded to earlier. If this is strain D8 and there are these substitutions, then maybe the vaccine isn't as protective. So maybe that's what's going on. It's just mutated itself away from a strain that the vaccine protects against. Maybe that's what's happening. And then he's saying that because of these exact mutations, the vaccines and vitamin A treatments could become less effective. He said there's vitamin A escape potential, and that's the same point about maybe vitamin A being less effective with this mutation, because vitamin A is what you use to treat measles still in the hospital today. It's standard of care according to the WHO. It's standard of care according to the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'll show that slide in a second. But vitamin A enhances measles immune clearance. It boosts your mucosal barrier integrity. That's where you have the IgA antibodies. It's your first line of defense in your saliva, your skin, all your mucous membranes, basically. Maybe not your skin, your mucous membranes. And it enhances T cell function, vitamin A. So his hypothesis is that the mutations are enabling faster viral replication and may diminish vitamin A effectiveness indirectly. And he cautions us there's no direct resistance to vitamin A yet, but accelerated viral dynamics could counter its protective effects, and increased diversity could yield escape variants. So those are Dr. James Lyons Weiler's slides. I thank him very much for putting those together. I'm really looking forward to his analysis of the 2025 and now 2026 measles strains to see if there's anything fishy going on. There's some indications that there might be, but we don't know yet. So here's my proof about the standard of care in measles cases. First of all, standard of care is that if somebody's sick with a fever above 101, you don't give the measles vaccine. This is right on the package insert. And the media, of course, is going around, and our public health authorities are going around in early 2025 saying to vaccinate everybody. But fever is contraindicated. And I didn't ever hear anything in the media or from public health authorities about not vaccinating people with a current fever. Here's the WHO and the AAP. They both recommend vitamin A supplementation to people with measles, especially in the hospital. It's standard. And this is going to come into play in just a second because they are going to ream Bobby Kennedy for recommending vitamin A. Here's just another quote from Dr. Edwards. He said that the death of the Texas child who tested positive for measles might have been prevented if hospital staff had given her breathing treatments such as budesonide and vitamin A. So he's just talking about that here. So here, now we get to the first family whose beautiful little girl, 6 years old, supposedly died of measles. She did have measles spots. And here are her parents being interviewed by Polly Tommy and Dr. Brian Hooker. They're very brave to go on camera. But here's what we found out. The girl likely died of hospital mismanagement at Lubbock, Texas Tech. Remember? Deborah Birx, Texas Tech Hospital. Yeah, you remember. Remember hospital protocols from COVID? Get a load of this. So the 6-year-old girl did get measles. Her 4 siblings also got measles and they recovered. But this one girl got a secondary pneumonia infection, which happens to 1 in 20 healthy children. I don't know if that's only happening since the introduction of the measles vaccine in the late 1960s or has always happened, but I doubt it, is because if 1 in 20 healthy children got pneumonia from measles in the past, people would have been more scared of it. The parents report that this girl's measles rash was mostly gone by the time they got to Texas University Medical Center in Lubbock. The diagnosis at the hospital wasn't measles, it was mycoplasma pneumonia, which is a bacterial infection of the lungs, as I said. They delayed the antibiotics. The father asked for breathing treatments, otherwise known as budesonide. And they were denied because it's not standard of care. They can't do it. They gave the girl the wrong antibiotic after delaying it when she had a bacterial infection of her lungs. And when they came to talk to the parents, they said, "Oh, great news. We have a hotel for you. You can leave the hospital and stay in the hotel and come back tomorrow. And the hospital is going to pay for it." When has a hospital ever offered to pay for a hotel for a family visiting a patient? Ever. So the parents ended up going to the hotel, but before they left, the mother noticed how parched her daughter was, and she wanted to get her daughter water, and the hospital even denied water because guess what their plans were? They had a plan to sedate the girl and put her on a ventilator after the parents left, so they didn't want her aspirating any water. This is so sad. And so the hospital sedated the girl and put her on a ventilator, and everybody knows what happened next is she died. So was this measles or was this hospital mismanagement? And why did these protocols look so similar to COVID protocols? The parents were interviewed deeply about this, and the mother of this girl said she still would not vaccinate her children for measles. She would not recommend the MMR vaccine to other parents because in their small community of Mennonite people, there's a few thousand children there from my research, and about a dozen of them got autism after the MMR, so they're all really scared of the measles vaccine. So they're not going to do it. So now they start to really put the screws on Kennedy. There's been a death, and it looks like a manufactured death at the hospital close to where Deborah Birx is supposedly stationed, right? March 7th. Amid a growing measles outbreak, this is the headline in NPR, doctors worry RFK Jr. is sending the wrong message. Wow. And so that it says, while mentioning the value of vaccination for community immunity, Kennedy said the decision to vaccinate is a personal one. See, he thinks it should be a choice. It's not anti-vaccine. He thinks it should be a choice. Okay, so boom, that is big news. There's a death now. So first measles case in a long time, or first big measles outbreak in a long time is this big peak here. And then here, this next big peak, this is when the girl died in the hospital. Okay, I'm going to keep coming back to this. March 31st, a few weeks later. Now they're digging into RFK Jr. about vitamin A, and they're saying it's toxic. What to know? This is Axios. What to know about vitamin A's toxic risks after RFK Jr. promotes it for measles. April 3rd, second child dies at Lubbock Hospital from hospital mismanagement. Same situation here. Unbelievable. This girl's name was Daisy. She was 8. She did have medical issues prior to this. She had chronic Epstein-Barr activation, which is basically mono, and tonsillitis. She got measles and she'd recovered from measles, according to her dad. And she was actually recovered from measles for a full 2 weeks before she was hospitalized. So then she became septic. That's like a systemic bacterial infection, and it was with staph or strep. So the parents brought her to Texas University Medical Center in Lubbock. Again, kind of close to where Deborah Birx is supposedly stationed. Her septic bacterial condition led to ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. Is this sounding anything like COVID? The early days of COVID, severe breathing issues. She had a lung infection. Again, same. The other girl had a lung infection also, but the hospital stopped the antibiotics. Why are these two cases so similar at the same hospital? The father asked for budesonide breathing treatment. He asked for it by name this time. They said no, it's not standard of care. The hospital instead gave IV steroids, which is an immunosuppressant to somebody with a bacterial infection. Systemic steroids are not something you would give to somebody with a bacterial infection. You might give it to them as a breathing treatment in the lungs to open up the lungs, but you would never give IV steroids and suppress someone's immune system when they have a systemic bacterial infection. Then, of course, they sedated Daisy. They intubated her for the ventilator. And Dr. Malone, who reviewed all these records, noted that the hospital seemed to use COVID protocols. Seems like that to me. And the father, again, he stated on camera that Daisy did not die of measles and indicated hospital mistreatment. So Bobby Kennedy, I believe, is getting the message here. A second girl has died, and they're saying it's from measles. It looks like hospital mismanagement in both cases. He catches on to what's going on here. I think he knows that these deaths were manipulated and he needs to stop this carnage. So he goes very publicly, visits the epicenter of the Texas measles outbreak, and attends the funeral of Daisy. And that's on April 6th. And that's where he finally says what the media wants him to say and what the public health departments want him to say. And finally, they can attribute something to him in a headline. He finally says it. Most effective way to prevent measles is vaccination, RFK Jr. says in the most direct remarks yet. Yeah, the most direct remarks. They've been wanting him to say this for months. So he finally says it. That's April 6th. Now let's see what happens here with people searching measles terms. Boom, he said it. And now the measles searches go away. That's the last peak in here in Google Trends. And here I've circled, this is February 2025. This is April 7th, right here that week. And look what happens. This is when Bobby Kennedy says what they want him to say. And then measles cases suddenly go on a steep decline and go almost totally away. How about that? So let's look again at these 2026 measles cases and see if there's any connection to RFK Jr.'s MAHA success. There were vaccine policy changes and backlash, obviously in January and February 2026. In January 2026, the HHS under RFK Jr. overhauled the childhood vaccine schedule, reducing the number of vaccines on the routine recommendations from 17 down to 11, reducing the doses from 90 doses to about 45 doses. Deep State didn't like that. And so on February 13th, just a little later, Rolling Stone does a hit piece. By the way, they're working on another hit piece right now. I got contacted yesterday by a Rolling Stone reporter wanting me to talk smack about Bobby and Children's Health Defense. And I told the reporter I wouldn't participate. And I texted Bobby and told him I would not be participating and to expect another hit piece in Rolling Stone. And he thanked me. So Rolling Stone here says 6 planks of RFK Jr.'s year of healthcare demolition. We only reduced the schedule to match other countries, other developed countries who have far better rates of infant mortality, much lower than the United States, far better health outcomes. All we did was match our vaccine schedule to other developed countries in Europe. Deep State doesn't want that. So then Judge Murphy comes in mid-March, he issues an order that actually prevents the advisory committee from immunization practices from meeting. This is the committee that Dr. Robert Malone assured me was going to go over in public all the harms and all the data showing that the COVID vaccines were more harmful than helpful. And this just could not happen. The Deep State could not let this happen. The public health departments couldn't let this happen. Susie Wiles, chief of staff for Trump, couldn't let this happen. And as of now, the ACIP is not only prevented from meeting, and they have not reconvened, they are basically still technically disbanded. Bobby did something very strategic. He actually, the charter renewal for ACIP came up recently, and he rewrote the charter so that they could meet and the members would definitely meet the criteria, which they already did, but he made sure to use language that would mean that the members of ACIP truly met the real criteria required for membership in this committee, yet there's been no reconvening of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And this is the committee that makes the vaccine recommendations to the CDC director. And the CDC director typically accepts all of the recommendations from ACIP. So it's a very powerful committee, very public. I don't think there's any advisory committee in the US government that is more watched than the ACIP. So they can't meet. So now let's look at this chart again. Let's see what happens over here is this cluster. So January 2026, the measles cases start to slide up again. Isn't that interesting? Again, do measles drive politics or does politics drive the measles? So here we show the cases going up again when the vaccine schedule was changed. And then I take you back to this Easter egg chart that I showed you in the very beginning. We're closing out here. And you can see here that once the ACIP meetings were canceled, March 17th, all of a sudden the measles cases start to go away again. So what is this? What is this? Look back here again, January 2025 through April 7th or April 6th, 2025, lots of measles cases while they were trying to manipulate a phrase out of RFK Jr.'s mouth. And then the measles go back to background levels. And then things start up again when they don't like what's going on with the vaccine news, and they stop when they get what they want. I mean, what do you think of this? Can you tell me what you think of all this in the comments? Do you see what I see? Am I seeing things? Am I, like overly applying my pattern recognition skills? Tell me what you think. So, and then of course, public health departments start to use the measles outbreaks for their own purposes. And we get back to this headline again, reckless. Virginia, which CHD says is reckless. Virginia recommends the MMR vaccine for infants as young as 6 months old. Do you see what I see? Is this COVID for kids? Look at these comparisons. I am closing out here. Measles then and now. So the death rate pre-vaccine was, according to the CDC, was 1 in 10,000. The historical data do not support that. The historical data from our Bureau of Vital Statistics say the death rate was 1 in 400,000. This measles, I didn't update this. So this is, 1 in 1,400. But the CDC want us to believe it was 1 in 469 cases as of August 27th, 2025, because they're counting 3 deaths as measles deaths. And now you know that 2 of those deaths were not from measles. In the past, before the vaccine, measles responded really well to vitamin A. This measles that was in West Texas was not responding to vitamin A. It's very, very weird. Let's compare COVID to the measles just to show how similar things are. This is a deja vu for me. So the origin story, we talked about this before. It's a condescending origin story based on stereotypes. Chinese eating bat soup for COVID in 2021. Mennonites being backwards because they don't take all the vaccines and they don't use pharmaceuticals. Again, I think Mennonites are more Maha than the most Maha of us. In COVID, in the hospital and before the hospital, treatments were denied. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, vitamin C in this measles in 2025 in West Texas. The patients were denied vitamin A, budesonide, and antibiotics. They were denied sustenance in the hospital in both cases. In the case of COVID, food and water. And with this measles, with the Mennonite girl, they denied her water. Hospital homicide protocols, ventilator. 80% of people on a ventilator never came off. Remdesivir. 30% of people get kidney failure. Sedation. Horrible. In this measles, ventilation, sedation, wrong antibiotics. They isolated relatives in both cases. Relatives weren't allowed in the hospital in 2021. And with the Mennonite girl, the parents were sent to a hotel at the hospital's expense. Death certificate manipulation. Most of you probably don't know this, but in spring of 2025, the CDC changed the reporting guidelines for reporting deaths from COVID, only for COVID, not for any other viruses. So if somebody died with or of COVID, remember that whole thing? They had to put COVID as the number one thing on the death certificate, not the longest standing condition that led to the death. That's how historically it had been done for 17 years. But they changed this unilaterally for COVID. So if you died of the flu, which somehow went away in 2020 and 2021, that would not be listed first on your death certificate. The longest standing condition that led to your death would be listed. But always a double standard for COVID, right? And then for this measles, they illegally put measles as the cause of death for those 2 girls in West Texas. I assume that that's what was on their death certificate. I need to actually double check that. Both illnesses were previously benign. COVID was known as the common cold. Coronaviruses and adenoviruses were just known as colds before 2019. And then same with measles. Obviously, we've beat this like a dead horse. Measles was mild before the vaccine came out. There's definitely a manipulated strain in COVID, and we're not sure of that yet in measles, but it's very suspicious. And finally, another point of comparison is this political manipulation with COVID to make people take the COVID shots and to get people on the vaccine passport. And with this measles to block RFK Jr. or force statements out of his mouth. It's uncanny how many similarities there are. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 very close similarities between the COVID political manipulation and the measles political manipulation. Let's just go back to where we started. What's Deborah Birx doing in West Texas? This demotion for her. 2023, she was put there to identify and address health challenges, specifically in rural areas of West Texas. Doesn't that seem more suspicious now that you know the whole story? I'm just saying, circumstantial evidence, if there's smoke, there's fire. And I just want to know how much of this measles narrative is a con job. That's what I want to know. So, what do you think? Again, tell me what you think. Am I seeing things, or are these patterns that could mean something more than we're being told? Okay, thanks for watching the Alix Mayer Show today. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to share this with anybody you think needs to know this information, and I will see you in the next episode. We are so happy to have as our prime sponsor, Mish International, Northern California's acclaimed specialists in rare coins and gold and silver investments. Our friend and supporter, Robert Mish, is the same principal that started the company back in 1963, and he's still there every day with 63 years of experience. He has integrity, reliability, and fair pricing, whether you're buying or selling. When you have business to do with precious metals, you'll always be treated well at Mish International. Call 650-324-9110 and tell Robert that Alix sent you.